We're going to do a little bit of like an odd sort of December wrap up, mainly because we're going to talk about 3 classics that I read in December. I read some other things, but we're not going to go over those. I'll touch on those. I don't know. I probably already have. So let's get started. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for watching, thank you for being here. If this is your first time here, like the video, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel. We are talking about my classics that I read in December, and this was kind of like an accident. I didn't really like plan to read these in December, it just kind of happened. Only one of them I really planned on doing. So I read 3. The first one that we will start with is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I read this in its entirety on Christmas Day. And yeah, it was my first Charles Dickens that I have read. And I will say, I think, you know, if you've seen any of the movie adaptations, if you even like remotely know the story, it sort of lives up to that. It doesn't deviate too much. It is basically that, you know, it is 100 pages of here's this mean, nasty old man who is visited by 3 ghosts who tells him exactly what he can expect if he doesn't change his ways. You know, the first one being Marley, who's his old business partner, and is like, you're going to be doomed to hell. There's some great, like, awful imagery in here about, like, there's the sequence where Marley tells him, you know, like, you're going to be, like, dragged to hell, and, like, you'll be, like, suffering forever if you don't, you know, change your ways. And then at the end, there's, like, these horrible depictions of, like, Scrooge's, like, death, and what happens like immediately after his death with people like not really caring. I think all that stuff really worked. I think it's just a nice tale that you can read on Christmas that will take you a couple hours maybe at most to read. I will say, I do think Dickens is a good author, you know? I think lives up to the hype. Yeah, I don't have much to say about Christmas Carol. If you know the story, you know the story. The next one that I will mention is a book that I'm not quite done yet. I'm about halfway through, and that is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. And this is a book about 4 sisters, Meg, Jo, Amy, and Beth, that they live in New England. This takes place during the Civil War. There's the big movie a couple years ago. Yeah, I struggled with this at first because I was trying to sit down and I was trying to read it the way I would like any other book, basically. Just like sort of sitting down for an hour, 2 hours, and just kind of like plowing through the book. And I finally, I just wasn't, I don't know, something about it wasn't clicking. And I think that's just because that's just not really how you should read this book. You know, like the father is off in the Civil War, and it's about these 4 sisters and sort of what they get up to. This book isn't really, like, plot-driven. There's not much of a narrative other than, like... granted, this is based on the first half, so maybe this changes in the second half. But, like, it's just about, like, their day-to-day, everyday life and what they're getting up to and, you know, their thoughts on womanhood and, like, marrying and stuff like that. I think I found it hard to just read long stretches of it at a time. And so I definitely have started since then, like, just breaking it up, maybe reading, like, a chapter or 2 here and there. And I think that has been, like, a very nice way to enjoy this book and to read this book. It's just, like, you know, you just dip into this world every so often. And I think now that, like, you know, they're into the second year over the course of this book, and Jo has this relationship with Laurie, and Meg is, like, potentially going to be married, and the father returns from the war. I think now it's starting to, like, hit its stride as, like, oh, like, it's pretty compelling. I want to know, like, what happens in these lives with these sisters next. But yeah, so far, I would say that I am enjoying it once I figured out how I should be reading it. And I would recommend that as well for you, if you've never read Little Women, that you should, like, approach it not as like this is a book with a story and I'm going to be propelled by the story to read it all the way through to figure out what happens. Like, that's just not really what's happening. It's a lot more like of a character study. It's a lot more just about these sisters, their relationships, and it is perhaps best dealt out like in little doses across, a wide stretch of time. So maybe read this as well as something else. And whenever you need a break from that other thing that you're reading, just read a chapter or two of this. I think you'll quite enjoy it. And lastly, for those who are unfamiliar, over the course of December, I slowly, roughly 21 pages a day, read Moby Dick by Herman Melville. This is a beautiful edition. This is not the edition that I read. The edition that I read has a lot of footnotes and references. It's the Norton Critical Edition, the second edition. I'll put a picture of it on the screen. If you're going to read Moby Dick, this is a beautiful edition. Don't buy this one. Buy something that has footnotes, that has context stuff in it that will tell you a lot about what is going on and about what Ishmael is talking about. Moby Dick this is a tough one. I thought I was really going to love it. I've tried reading this book before, and I didn't get all the way through. I quit. I gave up. I think I was on vacation, honestly. I think it was when my parents lived in Florida, and I was reading it down there in Florida over Christmas break. And I just would have found other things I would rather do being in Florida. So I didn't finish it. And so I said, I'm going to, over the course of 1 month, I'm going to break it up as much as possible, read it slowly. I read about 20 pages a day, and I got all the way through. And now that I've gotten to the end and I've had a day or two to think about it, I think this is very much a book that I admire, but I don't necessarily know as though it's one that I particularly enjoyed reading. This was a 600-page book, and I think it says a lot that you can buy abridged versions of this book that cut out a lot of the non-essential whaling stuff. And that version of the book is 130 pages. There's a lot in here that has nothing to do. I'm not going to say it has nothing to do. Melville is obviously doing something very intentional by incorporating all of this stuff. I just don't think that what he did worked for me. I didn't find it to be as immersive as I was kind of hoping that it would be. There are sections that I think are incredibly immersive. Anytime we actually are following a story. I think Captain Ahab is one of the best characters I have ever read. And I think Melville has some of the best writing that I've ever read. And potentially even the best writing I read this year. Unfortunately, what I don't care about is a lot of the philosophical diatribes that Ishmael goes on that ultimately feel like they go nowhere, that ultimately feel like it's, I really don't know how to describe it. I think when there is a story that we're following, when they are on the chase of a whale, I think all that stuff is super exciting and fun to read. And that is the stuff that I was just ripping through. But then we get about the history of how the whale is depicted in books. And we talk about the different classes of whale. And we talk about, here's all the parts of a ship. And all the stuff that I think is meant to be fully immersive so that you when he makes little references, you understand them all. But that I ultimately felt weighed down a lot of what the book is doing. Because to be honest, all the sections about the beauty of the sperm whale and all this stuff, that is stuff I really, really liked and stuff I really, really enjoyed. I understand why it's in here, and I understand the juxtaposition of we're going to tell you about how wonderful and beautiful this natural beauty is. We're going to juxtapose that with we're trying to hunt it and kill it. And it is the very just essential story of man versus nature. And is this very essential story of marveling in something's beauty while destroying it at the same time. And so while all the big themes of the book came through for me, and it's why I really admire, because I really admire what the book is doing, I can't really say that I enjoyed reading 40% of it. There's still a lot of stuff here that even though I understood what he's doing with all this as metaphor and stuff, I'm reading, I'm just going okay, dude, get to the point. I think I understood what he was doing with all of this very early on. And I don't think I'm special. I think it's very easy to understand what he is doing with all of this very early on, to the point where a lot of it near the end just feels redundant. It feels like we've gone over this. Like, I understand what you're doing. I don't need any more. I want to know about Moby Dick and the whale. But like all the stuff in here about like when they meet other ships and Captain Ahab being just obsessed with Moby Dick, and about how like they basically all know that they've signed away like their death sentences, and yet they go anyways, and they keep going on, and they keep like all of this stuff. Like I found very interesting and compelling, and I think Ahab as a character is one of the most compelling characters in probably all of books, all of literature. But there's just not enough of that. Very little of this book actually takes place during the whaling voyage that Ishmael is talking about. And like we know from the beginning that he's the only survivor and he's telling this tale to us at a later date. But like I don't know, there's no real like weight or gravity to any of this by the end. And it's because I think we spend so little with any of these people. Like besides, you know, Queepeg and Starbuck and Stubb and Flask and some of the other people, like other than that, like Ishmael himself doesn't really feel like a character. He feels like a omniscient presence who is telling you the story. But we know that all this takes place, and we know all this because we know that he was there. But it never really feels like he is in fact like a character. And so I don't know. There's things about the book I really liked. There's things about the book that didn't work for me. But it's also a book that I feel like I like want to read again. Like at some point in my life to see if like maybe different things click. I definitely feel like reading it the first time through, getting a sense of what Melville is trying to do, and then reading it again at a different point, like knowing all that stuff going in and seeing what you can get out of it a second time, seems like it would be rewarding. So this is probably another book that I will return to at some point in my life. We shall see. Yeah, I wish I was blown away by it upon first reading. I just wasn't, and I don't know. I'm hoping I get there at some point in my life, but if I don't, I don't. You know, like it is what it is. So that is Moby Dick. I'm glad I read it, and I'm glad I took the time to like read it slowly rather than trying to like just cram it all in, because I think it would have led to a lot of skimming, and it would have led to a lot of me like skipping around and like, oh, this is a chapter about whale bones. I don't care. I'm not reading it. Like. The fact that I said, like, no, like, only 20 pages a day meant, like, I read every word. And I think that was really helpful. I would recommend that if you plan on picking up Moby Dick. Just read it slowly. You know, like, don't try to rush through it. It's a book that deserves your attention and that, like, kind of, like, demands your attention, which is something I really respect about it. And there's tons of resources out there that will help you through all the stuff you don't get. Like, there's so many biblical references in here that if you're unfamiliar with the Bible are going to go right over your head, but they do play like a pretty important role in the story. Like they're there for a reason. And so I would recommend using some resources to help you understand what's going on a page by page basis. But all in all, I don't think like the actual story driven parts of the narrative, I don't think are hard to follow. But yeah, sometimes it's not wrong. Like the book has a reputation for a reason. It does get very dense at points. So just keep that in mind. I liked it enough. I respect it. I admire this book. And I'll tackle it again at some point in my life. You know, I've got some odd years left. I'll try to fit it in at least once more. Anyways, that is what I read in December. Those are the classics I read and am continuing to read. I'll finish Little Women at some point. And yeah, let me know what you're reading down in the comments below. That is all I have for you today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Like the video, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and until next time, keep reading good books, love what you love. Goodbye, everybody.